Hello and welcome back to another episode of Fully Booked, the Hidden Gems author podcast, in which Craig Touch and myself chat some of the interesting figures and leading lights of this crazy industry of writing and self-publishing. And today we have a very special guest all the way from Ohio. It is Dr. Randy Overbeck, a former educator and now an author, here to tell us all about research. How are you doing today, Randy?
I am doing great. It's actually a cold but beautiful day here in Ohio.
I've heard Ohio is beautiful. I've never actually made it there myself yet, one of these days. And of course, somebody who knows all about it being freezing cold up in Toronto is the man himself, Craig Touch, the owner and founder of Hidden Gems and an author himself. How are you doing today, Craig?
Doing well. It is cold as usual up here. Well, for this time of month, I don't want to give people impressions. Some people think Canada's always cold, and that's not true. But it's cold lots of times. So anyway, thanks for joining us today, Randy. I know that you've written a number of books in different genres. So why don't you give us first of all a little taste of who you are, where you come from, how you got into this, and then we'll sort of dive into the topic that we want to discuss with you, which is research. And research is one of those things. We have talked about it on this podcast before, but everybody does it differently, and there's so many different facets of what you need to research when you're writing a book that it's always really, I think, really helpful to hear from different authors about how they do it, what they think is important, their process, so that other authors that are thinking about the kind of research that they need to do for their book will get some ideas about the best ways to do it. So why don't you start us off with a bit about who you are and how you got to this point?
I'd be glad to do that. As Roland said in the introduction, I'm a former educator, served children mostly here in Ohio for 40 years as a teacher, a college professor, and a school leader. And during that time, I picked up a great number of stories that I have used to mine to create some fiction. So when pretty much towards the end of my career, I started shifting from all of the a huge amount of my job was always writing anyway. So I simply shifted from the technical writing that I had to do in work to trying to apply those skills to fiction, and found I was pretty good at it. I had some good luck. So so far I have been fortunate. I've had 5 of my books published by small presses. The 6th is coming out this coming summer, and I have another one in the pipeline with an agent right now. We'll talk about those. All of them the first 6 are all mystery thrillers. The newest one that will come out is a historical suspense set in a Revolutionary War. So I'm prepared to talk about research from everything from in-person research that I had to do all the way to how do you research what happened in 1776 in New York City.
Oh, that's fascinating.
I bet the background you have of technical writing probably helped with that, right? Because with technical writing, you often have to do a lot of research.
And my particular positions that I held, I was responsible for doing most of the research for the school districts. I was a curriculum instruction guy, so I had to research computer technology. I had to research which resources were most successful, which methods. I had to research how to train teachers, all of those things. So it was a fairly natural transition to take those same skills and apply them in a literary fashion.
Yeah, and it's not just historical novels that need research. I mean, if you're writing a book, a mystery, let's say, that is set in an area of the world or an area even of your country that you're not familiar with, you still have to research that, right? You want to get those locations right, those facts right, because anybody who lives in that area who's reading the book, they're going to call you out on it if you're making stuff up.
That's exactly right. And I've been very fortunate in getting some help out. I'll talk a little bit about that, why I think the local people are really important. The series, The Haunted Shore Mysteries, of which the 4th one is coming out this particular summer, have done very, very well. I've got 2 bestsellers in the group. So far, the 3 books have won 9 national awards. So I think I've struck a good chord in there. But each one is set in a different location. That's the whole concept behind Haunted Shores Mystery. And all 3 of the locations are locations that I'm not native to. So I had to actually immerse myself in each of those locations to learn about what the local customs were, what the local foods were, all those kind of backgrounds, as well as a lot of other research I'm happy to talk about that has to do with the story that takes place in each area.
So that I think is a really good place to start, because that is something that would span most people's books, unless you're writing fantasy where you're making up the whole world yourself. Most books are going to be set in the real world, and unless you're limiting all of your books to the direct area where you live, you're going to need to do research. So how do you research those areas that you don't live in? I know ideally, as authors, we would love to be able to just hop on a plane and go and visit all those places. And some people do. A lot of people I know, I've spoken to people who, go on vacation, and then they use that as the setting and the location of their place. And that's a great idea too, but it's not always possible for everyone. So how do you go about researching all those things, local customs and areas and all that stuff, for something that you are not familiar with, a place that you're not familiar with?
Well, and I will start by saying each of the locations featured in my soon-to-be 4 novels are places that I first visited and selected. As I'm in each case for my books, I'm looking for a certain ambiance in the location. I try to pick places that are not quite as well known, but are resort towns that people will enjoy once they get there. And in each case, I spend multiple visits going to the location, learning about the area, learning about experiencing what they have to offer. My books are part travelogue as well as a mystery, because I'm trying to introduce people to, in the first book, the eastern shore of the Chesapeake Bay, which in my opinion is perhaps one of the undiscovered gems in the United States. It's a really gorgeous place to visit. And my intent was to kind of expose the greatness of each of these locations and what they had to offer, as well as weaving a mystery and ghost story into that particular location. One of the things that I learned very quickly was I had to get help from the locals. So what I've done in each area is I've tried to seek out somebody who can be my conduit for each of those locations and can help tell me if in fact, each one of these people end up reading the manuscript before it goes out to make sure that I've gotten the tone right, the language right, the geography right, all of those kinds of things. Usually it's a Chamber of Commerce person. Sometimes it's a librarian person, local librarian. It kind of depends on the area of who I find that's really excited about trying to give that kind of help. But in each case, I find that really critical. I have another problem that I deal with from a research perspective. I would not call it a problem. I call it a challenge. Deliberately, I set my books 25, 30 years earlier. So the first book is actually set in 1998. First book in the series is set in 1998. The second one in 99. The third one in 2000, and the last one in 2007. So in addition to capturing what the eastern shore of the Chesapeake was like, I have to capture what it was like in 1998, what was there in 1998 and what wasn't. So that's why you need somebody who's got local grounding to give you the particulars, because otherwise, you're exactly right, Craig. Somebody will read the book and go, that restaurant wasn't there, and that.
Right. Yeah, listen, you're doing it. So you're doing it the ideal way. Like, I mean, I think that that's the best way to do it. Not everyone can do it that way, but if you can go to those places and visit them, you're going to get the best feel for it. But you're taking even a step further, which I think is super key as well. Because I mean, if you go to a place, I know that I used to, when my kids were small, we would go to Jamaica almost every year. It was cheap. It's a cheap place to go from here. Nice weather, nice people. But honestly, we never really left the resorts. So I couldn't set a book in Jamaica with any authenticity unless I was setting it on a resort in Jamaica. So having somebody local to actually take you around and show you the real place. There was one time we went to we were on a cruise and without the kids. This was, I think, before we had the kids, and we went to, I think, St. Lucia, something like that, one of those places. And we got off, and we didn't have any specific excursion plan, but with cruises, you have like a certain amount of hours, and go to the beach, you go to whatever. But what we did instead is we went to a taxi cab and asked him to show us around the real St. Lucia. We didn't want to see all the touristy things, and he took us like to his neighborhood, and he showed us how they lived, and that was so eye-opening to us. It was so different than everything else we saw of that place just by going and doing touristy things. So that kind of thing gives you such a rich history and rich connection to the place beyond what you can do on your own. So I think the way you're doing it, the way you have done it, is a fabulous idea. So do you just approach these people and say, hey, I'm writing a book, and would you mind showing me around?
Yep. I generally come to them. Well, in the beginning, I was kind of stumbling when I first did this. I really didn't know. I had to kind of go around and ask who to do, who can I go to and stuff. And eventually, though, I kind of learned. I start with each place is different. I either start with a visitor center or the chamber, and I tell them what I'm interested in, and so somebody could help me. And I've been amazed. They not only are they willing to help, they're excited to help. They're excited. Now, I got to be real careful. So in each case, I'm doing a murder mystery, so in each case, things happen that are pretty nasty. I try to manage that carefully so that the murder, for example, in the one on the Chesapeake Bay, the town is imaginary. It's fictional town. The area is real, but the town is fiction. So I can depict the actual places where they would go to from this imaginary town, St. Michael's and Easton and Oxford and those kind of places, without besmirching their reputation. I did the same thing. The second one is in Cape May in New Jersey, and I had the murders happened just up the road, not in the town itself. So I'm cautious about I'm trying really hard to make sure that I don't do anything that would reflect negatively on the reputation of the town. I mean, that's kind of important. And to be honest, I've kind of stumbled into some great, like for example, the gal in Cape May, her name is Doreen Talley. I think she's president of the chamber. I'm not exactly sure what the title is, or director, or whatever. Anyway, in my book, it's called Crimson at Cape May. It's a murder mystery. It's a cold case murder mystery about a young bride that had been that they had said had committed suicide, but turned out had been killed some 5 years earlier. Blah blah. In the story, I have two protagonists. One is my primary protagonist, who is the teacher. I should have said that at the outset. My hero is a teacher. But
that makes sense.
There's a second protagonist in this one that's a goth teenager. And this takes place in 1999. You know what I'm talking about?
Oh, I definitely know. Yep.
Okay. Well, it turns out that the gal who's helping me, Doreen, wasn't exactly a goth teenager, but she was pretty much like what the goth teenagers did. She was kind of a rebel. So she showed me where they hung out, little corners of the places they hung out, and which restaurants would tolerate them and stuff. So it turned out to be, not only did she help me learn the town, but she helped me in other ways. And I found that to be the case in each of the locations I've gone to.
Did you specifically seek out somebody with that kind of knowledge of, sort of that, like,
that was an accident?
Okay, and was it that she had that background, and then you decided to put it in the story, or you already were?
I was planning on putting it in the story, and she said, "Well, I think the gal's 16 in the story." She says, "I was 15 about this time when this happened." I said, "Well," she said, "I can tell you." I said, "That would be great." And then, of course, she read the manuscript before it came out to make sure I had gotten all of those details and where the kids were coming from and correctly, all of that.
I find that so fascinating because, like, Cape May and the Chesapeake Bay are both places that aren't very far from where I am, but they are distinctly different, and they have a different kind of like vibe to them. And of course, setting them 30 years in the past, of course, like Cape May, the shore of New Jersey was completely different 30 years ago, and you had like really famous attractions that everybody would talk about that simply don't exist anymore. So it's a real challenge for you, but as you said, it's not a challenge; it's an opportunity.
Yeah, and I kind of like doing that, and it gave me an opportunity to capture the town in a way that people would go, "Oh, that's kind of neat." The other part, since we're talking about research, I want to
Now,
in
is
each
the
one of these
reason
towns, each one of the stories. Go ahead. Uh-oh.
Oh no, you carry on.
Okay. Each one of the episodes each one of the stories, I had to learn stuff that I didn't know anything about. So, for example, there's a big portion of a sizable portion of the first book, Blood on the Chesapeake, that takes place on the Chesapeake Bay, sailing on the Chesapeake Bay, both in good weather and in not so good weather. I'd never sailed on the Chesapeake Bay. So I had to learn that, and I had somebody come out, give me lessons, take me out on the sail, show me what it was like. And then one of the things that I was very lucky with is I have beta readers. So we can talk about that a little later, but I have people who read the book before it ever goes to an editor or the publisher. And one of my beta readers was a veteran sailor. So she was able to catch the fact I used the wrong knot in one place, and really very minor stuff to me. But she said, "Oh no, a sailor will catch that." So, yeah. But I love that kind of. I love learning those new things. The third book, the one that takes place in Florida, it's called the third one takes place in Crystal River. And Crystal River is one of the charming aspects of the town is it's the only place in America you can swim with manatees. So I got in the water to learn what it was like to swim with manatees, and that becomes interwoven in the plot in terms of what happens in the story. So those are all the kinds of things that I think you have to do to make the readers experience what that's really like in each of those towns.
I was going to ask the question, is the reason you set your books 30 years in the past anything to do with the fact that mobile phones weren't popular then? Because
no, people always ask that question, but that was just an accidental byproduct. Here's the real reason. So when I wrote the first book, I'm not sure that I had automatically planned I was writing a series. So I wasn't really that concerned. I was just interested in writing this first book that I thought had a good possibility of a cold case murder mystery and a ghost story. In this story, the cold case murder is actually a lynching that occurred in this town some 30 years prior to when it takes place. So first of all, I researched, there were actual lynchings that occurred on the Eastern Shore in an earlier time frame. And the latest lynching that happened in the United States that we have a record of is there's some debate, 63 or 64. So I wanted to make it so that I don't want to give away too much, so that the bad guys in the story were kids in those days, but were now people that were grown and had major roles in the town. So I actually thought, okay, well, they need to be in their 50s maybe. So from 64 to 98, that would put them in their 50s, which is kind of the power years and stuff. And that's the only reason that I said it in 1998. And once I had done that, well, then I had to keep the next one in 99 and the next one in 2000. And there's a reason for why the new one is in 2007, which I can talk about a little later. But anyway, so that is now in 2007. I have to include the use of mobile phones. They weren't really cell phones yet; they were flip phones. But
yeah,
I remember those.
I know it's so many when you watch shows from that time period, and it's often there's a whole episode that goes by, and at the end I'm thinking, this whole episode would have been solved if they just had cell phones. It's always like there's some miscommunication. Somebody doesn't know what's happening.
Right. So there is a little bit of that, of some problem not being able to get in touch with somebody,
right?
Because because they
And
don't
that's
have
great
anybody access.
to do that when you set it back in that time. Now it's like much harder. You gotta, why would he lose his phone? Let me figure some reasons why he doesn't have his phone and he can't ask other people for their phone. Everybody has a phone now. It's so it's almost like you have to like work around that as a problem when you're writing stories like this now. I love that you use these same people as your beta readers too. I mean, obviously you have more beta readers as well, but using the person that actually that you know knows the area, because a lot of times, you know, beta readers are really important, but a lot of times, you know, people hire beta readers that have no knowledge necessarily of the book that they're writing, that they've written, and you know, so they can comment on all sorts of things about the story and the plot and the characters, but they might not necessarily know about, you know, the authenticity of the location and all that stuff. So having at least that one person that you know for sure lives there, and I'm sure that they're very motivated to want to read the book after they were sort of felt like they were a part of it, showing you around. Yeah, and you probably thank them in your book as well, right?
I do. I get that. I make sure that they get recognition in there as well.
Right. So further motivation, right? Of course, you're going to want to read a book that mentions you.
The other part that's since we're talking about research, so each one of my books, the murder mystery is tied to a social issue that the country is still grappling with, whether that's Canada or the U.S. So in the first book, the theme behind the story is about racial injustice, and Daryl is experiencing discrimination that he's seeing in the school at the same time as he's trying to find out what happened to this young. It was a kid. It was a high school kid that was lynched, and so I had to do a lot of research because I knew a little about lynching, but I didn't know a lot about it. So I wanted to make sure that the fictional story that I portrayed mirrored as much as possible the factual record of what occurred in towns when lynchings happened. So as an example, one of the things I learned was that in most all the towns where lynchings occurred, the lynchings were often a public spectacle. There would be hundreds of people witnessing the lynching. A generation later, researchers could not find anybody who would admit to being there. And almost always, the lynchings later were covered up as something like suicide. So those are some of the pieces that I put into the book. So when Daryl starts asking about what happened, the story in the town is, well, this kid was depressed and he was upset about how he was being treated, so he killed himself, hung himself from the school, from the school balcony. And the second book, similarly, is about the murders tied to human trafficking. When I started the book, I really didn't know a whole lot about human trafficking. So I had to do a lot of research on human trafficking and how that works and what pieces were. And it's kind of helpful because Daryl is a fish out of water. You guys know what that term means, right? So each place he goes, he's new to that place and he has to learn the place. And Daryl knows nothing about human trafficking. So he's kind of going to the library, trying to find out what he knows, those kinds of things. So it's a very interesting way of putting each piece. In fact, each of those pieces of research are as important to the book as the actual murder, in my opinion. The location, the background behind it, the social issue that's wrapped in the murder. Each one of those are important things that make my books, I think, unique or at least different from a lot of other murder mysteries.
Yeah, I think that the genre is often really informed how much detail you need. If you're writing a romance and you set it in a city that you've never been in, there's very little research you probably need to do, right? I mean, maybe he takes her out to dinner at a fancy restaurant or they go to a well-known hotel, but you don't need to know the details you would need as you would as a thriller where maybe there's a chase scene down different side streets or a mystery where the clues are taking him to different parts of the city, and I think that sort of really tells you how much research you need to do. It's a starting point. It's like, what kind of book am I writing and how important is location to the story? And then from there you you might decide, okay, well, I need to go there, or I need to figure out how to research that without going there.
Well, and I should mention, because this is all part of the research process that I have, that each real location, or each real destination in the location, if it's an actual restaurant, if it's an actual, like in the new book, there's a dune ride that they go on. I get permission from all of those places to include the actual name, the actual experience in the book. So when I use a restaurant, I reach out to the restaurant and get permission from them to have included. I use an actual beer that they serve on the Eastern Shore in both it's actually available both in Cape May and in
Which beer?
Which beer? I'm not a beer drinker, so hard for me to remember.
I am. My little ears perked up when I heard that.
I had to go to the publisher. It was really important. The publisher had me go and get permission from the beer, and the beer company made it very clear how I had to list the beer. You have to read the book and see what you think, Roland. It's in your neighborhood.
I might do that.
It's so when you include those things, are you only including ones that you've actually visited? Like, did you go and do the dune experience?
Yeah.
Did you
Yes.
eat at that restaurant? And did you drink the beer, even though you're not a beer drinker?
No, but I had a friend who's a beer drinker that did that, and then kind of could give me the.
So you really, really are immersing yourself. I mean, are you ever including anything in your books from those perspectives that you haven't necessarily done yourself? I mean, I think it's great that you go to those lengths.
I will include some things that locals will tell me about that I don't have any. I didn't have any personal experience,
Well, certainly if they're 25 years old, not there anymore.
Yeah. Well, Cape May has. Crystal River. Crystal River. One of the things that's famous, Crystal River, was Elvis. A famous movie, actually a movie that wasn't really very good. Elvis did in Crystal River at this one resort location. Well, I didn't go to that, but I heard about it, so I think it's included a little bit in one of the descriptions that's going on. So, but by and large, if an experience is described in any of the books, I pretty much did that same experience myself personally. So if it's a tour, I went on the tour. If dune buggy ride around, I did the sail. All of those things are all part of what I was. And to be honest, I kind of choose what to put in there in terms of what I found interesting about the town. What made the town fun to go there.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to include it, you might as well include things that you want to do. If there's something that doesn't interest you, why would you write about it, right?
Right. The other thing I wanted to mention from a research perspective is I try to be very sensitive, because in each one of the stories, I'm writing about somebody else's issue. Okay. I'm an old white guy. I'm not African American. I've not had to experience racial discrimination. Didn't know anything about human trafficking. I don't know anyone in that world of human trafficking. So I had to rely on other resources to be able to learn that. And I try to be sensitive. The third book, the one that takes place in Florida, the underlying theme is about the abuse of migrant workers, how migrant workers are taken for granted. And I didn't know much about that. So I had to get in contact with some people who could vet my perspective to make sure that it was fair. I'm not saying that I can give their perspective, because again, Daryl's the outsider. The newest book, the one that will come out later this year, is called Red Shadows at Saugatuck. Saugatuck is a resort town on the western side of Michigan, on Lake Michigan. And the theme behind the murder in that one has to do with murdered and missing Indigenous women. So what I did is, and I used the tribe that lives in that area as part of the story. So before I ever wrote the story, I went to the tribal elders and talked to them about my idea and my plan, and picked their brain of what they thought should or shouldn't be included in the story. And then also when the book was finished, sent it to them to vet it to make sure that I had represented fairly, that I didn't use any language that was disparaging and those kinds of things. And I think that's just as important from a research perspective as all of these other things that we're talking about.
Yeah, it sounds like you're using sensitivity readers, basically, right? So,
Right.
Which is another really important thing to do when you're writing about a sensitive topic, regardless of whether you have some knowledge of it, personal firsthand knowledge of it or not. It always makes sense to sort of have people that really have a deep knowledge of that to read it, to make sure you're not, offending anyone, or you're not getting any of the facts wrong. You're not, talking. Often there are things that people believe about whatever that thing is that is really not true at all. And sometimes we include those things because they seem like everybody knows that that's the case, and then you find out that's not the case at all. Those are stereotypes that let's say about that thing, and then through sensitivity readers you find out whether or not you've included any of those accidentally, or maybe you include them on purpose as part of the story, but you want to know that and make sure you're doing it right.
Yeah, and I'm, as a writer, I do not believe that I can only write from one perspective. Several of my protagonists in my stories are women. Well, first of all, I've spent all my professional life basically with all women, so I've been listening to women talk forever. And I don't mean that in a disparaging way. It's what my ears are open. But I make sure that many of my beta readers are women. So one of the things they're looking for is, did I get this point of view correct? Did I get the speech right? Did I get would they do this right? And they're very quick to tell me, no, that's not how I would say that. That's how a guy might say that, but a woman would say it this way. That was the same thing I was hoping for the African Americans and also for the Native Americans when having them look at it.
Yeah, that's something that I think when men write romance, sometimes that's one of the things that they hear is like, oh, you didn't you write your female characters the right way, and maybe females hear the same thing as maybe when they try to write from the male perspective, that they're not getting the same things. So it's a hard balance sometimes, for sure.
You write 2 or 3 pages about how to strip a gearbox of a 1969 Camaro, and suddenly it's all like, oh, a man must have written this.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think, but my point is that if you're going to write outside your own POV, then you're going to need help to make sure that you're getting that right, because nobody automatically knows an alternate POV just by themselves. So they, I wouldn't know how African American. Well, let me use a better example. So in the Florida book, in the Crystal River book, one of the primary characters is an immigrant. From Mexico? No, I think from Puerto Rico. I don't remember now, but I made sure that I had somebody check to make sure I had all the language correct. I had somebody else read it to make sure that I had projected this character in a way that was both accurate and fair from where they were coming from.
Right. So beyond, location and the people, and their backgrounds and stuff, what other sorts of things do you find necessary to research? And with those things, are you also trying to get this kind of firsthand research whenever possible?
Yeah, well, firsthand research is always better, but it's not always possible. Though, in the new book that I have coming out called Abigail Trench, Patriot Spy, it takes place in 1776 through 1783 in New York City. So obviously, I don't have any first-person accounts. So everything had to be done old school-wise. I had to look up original sources and find language that was used in that time, all of those pieces. And sometimes that's what you have to do. And I don't want to make it sound like everything that's in all of the books was all first person research. That's not true. In each case, I did a lot of online research and map research and stuff in addition to being in person. I mean, you know, before I wrote the first book, I probably made 6 trips to the Eastern Shore. But when I actually wrote the book, I had to get the map out and physically look at it and go, okay, this is here. In order to take this, I would come over here. So yes, you still have to do a lot of that paper or online research in addition to doing it. Kind of reinforces your in-person because I'm not lucky enough to be able to go and live on the Eastern Shore for months at a time to write the book, you know, or as much as I'd like to go down to Florida and stay there for months on end and write. That's, you know, that's not feasible for me. Maybe somebody else could do that has other resources that I don't have, but that doesn't work for me. So those other, the online and the online resources become pretty important to back that up.
Yeah.
Quite nice to go down to Florida for a few months to write a book.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that does underscore an important point that even when you're doing this firsthand research, there's always going to be things that you'll still need to look up, that you'll still need to verify. And especially in that case, and I was thinking about that as you were saying it, that, you know, unless you're going to write the book in that spot, when you go home, it doesn't matter if you've gone 6 times, when you go home and you start writing, stuff is inevitably going to come up that you didn't necessarily go and check, and you're not going to keep running back to that place every time one of those things comes up. So you'll need to do your research, or maybe call your friend at the library and be like, hey.
Yep. And
you do that.
An example. So in Cape May, in the second book in Cape May, there's a car chase involved, a pretty decent car chase. Well, I wanted to make sure that I had the streets exactly right. So I took pictures when I was there. I had a pretty good idea of exactly this one place where it originates. I knew where that was. I knew how to go through town, but then they go out on the highways. I actually physically had to get the map out and start looking and go, okay, they turn this way. They're going to be on 33, you know, where am I going to have this ghost appearance happen? And so that's an example of, even though I've been there, I knew what I wanted to do. I kind of had a pretty good idea of how that went. I needed the physical, or I guess you could have done online resource to be able to make sure that it was exactly correct. So somebody didn't come and say, well, that wasn't Highway 33. They were on 28.
Yeah, and I mean, it is easier now to do it online, especially with things like Google Maps and Street View, right? You could actually map out your route on Street View and go through it and actually see, you know, everything. And you could be mentioning the stores that he's zooming past, or but that's again only going to be if you're setting it in sort of modern times. If you were set it 25 years ago, those kind of details might not be there. The streets might even be different. So it really depends on, I guess, your time frame too.
Yeah, in fact, when I will tell you that I sent the newest book to my contact in Saugatuck, and she actually loved the way I had portrayed the town, and her only real criticism was I had used 2 highways incorrect. I had used the names of highways incorrectly. She said, "You don't mean that highway, you mean Blue Star Highway."
And did you go back and correct it?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. This was before it went to the publisher. So.
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
They do all this before it ever before I ever submit it to the publisher.
Yeah, that's the beauty of the beta readers for sure. So when you are thinking about a new story, are you basing it on just an interest of yours, or are you sort of saying, or like do you say, hey, where do I want to visit next, and then look into that and say, oh, those kind of things happen in that area, and that, you know, that historically that area was really big for this kind of problem, and so that would be a great setting. Is that how you do it, or do you come at it at a different angle?
Well, so I have 2 series. The book, we spent most of our time talking about the Haunted Shore Mystery Series, so of which there will be, come this summer, 4 books. Each of the 4 books had been decided exactly that way. So I was interested in the Eastern Shore, and therefore I looked for an issue that works, that was in concert with the Eastern Shore. So that's how that was picked. Then I kind of stumbled onto Cape May, to be perfectly honest. I had never been to Cape May. My brother, as I mentioned to Roland, my brother lives in Stone Harbor, just up the road from Cape May, and introduced me to Cape May, and I fell in love with the town. And then I learned that when I did my research about that area, I learned that it's about 20 miles from the largest human trafficking ring in the United States, because human trafficking travels the same way all other freight does, over the interstate highways and stuff. So it's a really big hub for human trafficking. So I thought, oh, well, put that together. Then I decided I wanted to go to Florida. So I found a small town in Florida that I really love, this Crystal River. And when I researched around there, one of the things that within 20 miles of Crystal River, there's these huge strawberry plantations. And I don't know if you know this or not, but strawberries are the most profitable fruit product of anything that they raise in Florida, but they're also the most backbreaking work of any migrant work that's done. And the statistics on what happens to those workers are really terrible. So I had the parents of the kids that are killed involved in that. Anyway, so that became that. When I did the fourth book, I was actually looking for an issue that I wanted to tie to it, and I ended up reading about missing and murdered indigenous women, MMIW, which is now gaining a lot of traction. But in 2007, hardly anybody knew anything about this. And then I picked Saugatuck because it fit there. And my protagonist actually is a native of Michigan who moves to, in the first book, he gets dumped at the altar, so he moves to the Eastern Shore. He's going back home. So the only piece that you left out was, I try to think, well, is it logical that he would go to this place? So he's living on Eastern Shore. He loses his job. He takes a new job at Cape May as a football coach. He gets married. They're on their honeymoon in Crystal River. That's how come they happen to be down there. Well, now in the fourth book, they have a baby, and they're going back for his aunt's 80th birthday party back in Michigan. Then he gets haunted by motor. So each of those has a reason in the story itself.
Right. I forgot that he's not necessarily a detective. He's a teacher. So
Right.
So it's one of those cases where, why do these things keep happening to me? Every time he goes on vacation, something happens, and he's got to solve a case, right? He
sees ghosts who want him to get justice, and he's not really happy about that because all it does is screw his life up. So he put his life in danger.
Yeah, and I mean it's a nice, like I get it now when you were mentioning the fish out of water idea. So it's that idea where you have to keep coming up with reasons why things are happening when he's away, and he's the kind of person who always has to deal with it. But that's a pretty easy suspension of disbelief for the readers, right?
Absolutely.
As long as readers will kind of go with me with the fact that some people could in fact see ghosts, then the rest of it is a pretty fun ride for them.
That sounds awesome. Well, we are approaching the top of the hour, so this seems like a good place to wrap it up. But what a fun discussion. I've really enjoyed this one.
Yeah.
I'm glad to be here.
I think it's great. I think, sometimes when we start these off, I have an idea of how they're going to go, and then they go in a slightly different direction. And then I think that's great because it's often, it's organic, right? And so in this case, I knew we wanted to talk about research, but, we focused on the first person research, which is awesome because it's not something that we have talked about very much. So, and it's so important. And like when you can do it, if you can do it, it's a great way to get the best kind of grounding in your story and authenticity that you need. And I love that you're bringing in the locals to really give it that flavor as well. So thanks for coming on and sharing that with us.
Well, I'm glad that I was able to share it with everybody. That's I really enjoyed it. I think it's important to support others in the literary community, and I'm glad to do that whenever I can.
Well, hopefully there are going to be some people who have been so interested in this discussion that they want to support you. So, Randy, where can they find out more about you, more about your books and everything like that?
The easiest way to find everything out about me is at my website, which is just author, Randy Overbeck, RandyOverbeck. They can buy my books there. They can catch any of my social media. I also have a podcast called Great Stories about great storytellers, which reveals the backstories of famous authors, directors, and poets. They can get that as well as my blog. Everything they would want to know, they'll find on that one page.
Well, wonderful. We will pop a link to that right down below in the description of this video. So if you're interested in finding out more about Randy's books, why don't you scroll down there and go and check that out. And while you're there, you will, of course, see that big empty comment box. Make sure to leave Randy a comment. Let him know how much you have enjoyed everything he has shared with us today. While you're down there, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, and there is a little bell icon you can click to get notified every time there is a new episode of Fully Booked. And of course, there will be a brand new episode next week. So until then, cheerio.